My girlfriend used to be so free and natural around me, but time passed and everything went bad. She coldly said she won't marry me until I earn what her friends' husbands make, so I left quietly. Hey Reddit, my name is Luna, and I need to share what happened because I'm still trying to process how everything fell apart so quickly. What started as what I thought was an innocent prank ended up destroying my relationship in ways I never saw coming. It wasn't supposed to go down like that at all. It was just the three of us hanging out like we always did. Me, my boyfriend Blake, and my best friend Mia. We were at Blake's apartment in Miami, the same place we'd spent countless evenings together. The three of us were sprawled across his couch with some random Netflix show playing in the background. Though honestly, I can't even remember what we were watching because none of us were really paying attention to the screen. Wow, okay, so you're just down for that, I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice that definitely hadn't been there moments before. Now, Blake looked confused, like I was the one being weird and unpredictable. The casual confidence he'd had just seconds earlier seemed to evaporate as he realized something had shifted in the room. Blake looked at me like he already knew that I had nothing genuinely new or different to say to him. Like he'd heard all of my apologetic words and explanations before, and this time he wasn't going to give me the emotional reset that I was clearly hoping for. There was no forgiveness in his eyes, no willingness to start over, no indication that he was interested in rebuilding what we'd had together. I tried to say something about how I actually felt about him, how I didn't mean for everything to spiral out of control the way it had. But even as the words were coming out of my mouth, I could hear how hollow and unconvincing they sounded. Blake nodded, like he'd heard those exact phrases from me too many times before, like they didn't carry any real meaning or weight anymore. Then Blake said something that cut even deeper than his previous observation. He told me that he didn't think I actually wanted him as a person, that what I wanted was just to have the position filled. According to him, I liked having someone there in my life, someone to bounce my emotions and ideas off of, someone to orbit around me and provide me with attention and validation. But I didn't actually want him specifically, with all of his individual thoughts and feelings and needs. I tried to protest and say that wasn't true, that I did care about him as an individual person and not just as a boyfriend-shaped placeholder in my life. But even as I was saying the words, I didn't believe the way they sounded coming out of my mouth. The truth was becoming increasingly clear to me as we sat there. I had been more focused on regaining control of our relationship dynamic than I had been on actually examining what I had done wrong or how I had hurt him. I couldn't argue with his observation because it was uncomfortably accurate. I had been treating this meeting like a negotiation where I needed to say the right combination of words to get him back, rather than genuinely reflecting on my behavior and trying to understand his perspective. I was trying to manage the situation rather than actually address the underlying problems he had identified. Blake stood up from his chair before I did, clearly signaling that our conversation was over from his perspective. He said that he wasn't angry with me anymore, that he had moved past anger and was just completely done with all of it. There was no emotion in his voice when he said it, no hurt or frustration or even disappointment, just a calm, final statement of fact. When he walked away from me that time, I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't like any of our previous fights or temporary breakups. There was no waiting period this time, no cooling off phase where we'd both eventually soften and find our way back to each other. He wasn't bluffing or testing me to see if I would chase after him. This was a definitive ending, and he wasn't planning to hand our relationship back to me no matter what I said or did. After he left, I just sat there in the coffee shop completely still and frozen. Nothing in my body wanted to move or react to what had just happened. There was no panic or fake sense of urgency driving me to run after him or send desperate text messages. Just this slow, sick feeling spreading through my chest as I realized that this wasn't about our specific fight anymore. Something fundamental had broken completely between us, and Blake wasn't going to be the one to try to repair it. He had made his decision and he was sticking with it, regardless of whether I agreed with that choice or understood his reasoning. The power dynamic that had characterized our entire relationship had shifted permanently, and I was no longer in control of the outcome. I haven't told anyone about this final conversation we had. When friends have casually asked how things are going with Blake, I just say everything's fine and immediately change the subject. I don't want to have to explain to people what really happened, and I definitely don't want to say out loud that I pushed something too far and now it's completely gone forever. I told him it was just a joke, that Mia and I had planned the whole thing as a prank to see how he'd react. But instead of laughing it off or seeming relieved, he just raised his eyebrows at me with that slightly annoyed expression he always gets when he thinks I'm being overly dramatic about something. It was that look, that smirk that suggested I'd totally ruined the mood over nothing. That made everything so much worse. I keep playing the entire sequence of events back in my head, all the way from the very beginning. That stupid night on his couch when the three of us were just hanging out casually. The threesome joke that I thought was so clever and harmless. Blake's immediate response and the expression on his face. My reaction and the way I stormed out. Every single second of it feels clearer and more significant now than it did when it was actually happening. At the time, I thought I was being sharp and clever, that I was in complete control of the situation and orchestrating something that would be funny for all of us. But what I really was, I can see now, was scared. I was scared of not having the upper hand in our relationship, scared of not knowing exactly where I stood with him. I wanted to feel like I had some kind of power or control over our dynamic, and I wanted to test his loyalty without looking like I was directly asking for reassurance. I wanted to create a scenario where I could gauge his feelings without making myself vulnerable by simply asking honest questions about our relationship. Instead of being direct about my insecurities, I hid them behind what I convinced myself was just a harmless prank. And now I'm sitting with the devastating results of that choice. This wasn't the dramatic, explosive breakup that I always thought would signal the end of a serious relationship. There were no tears, no shouting matches, no major betrayals or cheating scandals. This is actually worse than any of those scenarios would have been. This is Blake being completely emotionally finished with me and not needing me to agree with his decision or understand his reasoning. The thing that's really killing me inside is that I don't even know if I genuinely want him back. Not in the way I thought I did when this all started. What I want more than anything is the ability to rewind everything and handle it completely differently. I want to go back to that moment on the couch and pause before I said anything. I want to ask myself what I actually needed from him instead of hiding my real feelings behind a stupid test. But there's no fixing any of this from where we are now. Not because Blake won't let me try, but because I finally saw the part of him that simply won't be managed or controlled by anyone. I got a glimpse of the version of Blake that makes his own decisions based on his own needs and boundaries, and I have no idea how to reach that person or appeal to him. He's not confused about what happened between us. He's not hurt or angry anymore. He's just completely indifferent to me and our history together. And that indifference is what's destroying me, because now I finally understand something crucial. Blake didn't walk away from our relationship to punish me or teach me a lesson. He walked away because I had given him more than enough reasons to do it, and he simply decided that he was done. I couldn't stand sitting there another second. I stood up from the couch abruptly and told them both that I was leaving. Without waiting for any kind of response or explanation from either of them, I walked straight out of his apartment without looking back, my heart still pounding from whatever that intense feeling had been. That should have been the end of it. Just one of those little blow-ups that we'd probably laugh about later, once everyone cooled down. But I found myself completely unable to stop replaying the entire scene in my head, over and over again. It consumed my thoughts all night long, and then the next day too, and even the day after that. I kept seeing his face in my mind, hearing exactly how casual and matter-of-fact he had sounded when he agreed. What bothered me most was that there had been no hesitation at all in his voice. No, wait, what? Response like I'd expected. No pause to think about what I was actually suggesting. He had just been completely sure about it, like the idea didn't even surprise him. This led me down a rabbit hole of questions that I couldn't stop asking myself. Why was it so easy for him to say yes? Was it just a joke to him too? Or was it something else entirely? Had he actually thought about this kind of scenario before? The more I thought about it, the more I had to acknowledge something I'd been trying not to focus on. Mia really is attractive. I know that. Everyone knows that. She's one of those people who just naturally draws attention wherever she goes. She's always hanging around with us, and I'd always thought of her as just my friend who happened to be part of our social circle. But now I was questioning whether I'd been naive about Blake's feelings toward her. I started thinking back to other times we'd all been together, analyzing interactions I'd previously brushed off as meaningless. The way he sometimes looks at her when she's talking. How he always seems to laugh a little harder at her jokes than he does at mine. How he consistently offers her the last slice of pizza, even when I've already mentioned that I want it. These were all small, seemingly insignificant things that I'd usually just ignore or rationalize away. But now they felt loaded with potential meaning. The more I dwelled on these memories, the angrier I became. Not just at him, but at myself too for setting up this whole situation in the first place. I was furious with myself for letting it get to me this much, for caring so deeply about something that was supposed to be harmless fun. But mostly, I was mad at how Blake hadn't made any effort to fix what had happened between us. I kept waiting for him to text me something, anything. Maybe an "Are you okay?" message or a "Can we talk?" text. But there was just complete radio silence from his end, like the whole incident had never happened. Mia did text me though, saying she didn't think it was such a big deal, and suggesting that maybe I had overreacted to the whole situation. I wanted to yell at her through the phone, but I couldn't even properly explain to myself why it felt like such a massive, relationship-threatening issue. The truth was, it wasn't just the joke itself that was eating away at me. It was what the whole situation had revealed about our relationship dynamics. What it had made me feel inside was something I still struggled to put into words. I kept thinking about how different things would be if the roles were reversed. If Blake had made some casual joke about hooking up with one of his female friends, and I had just nonchalantly said yes without any hesitation, he would have absolutely lost his mind. Mia had curled her legs under herself and was casually munching on the chips we'd made earlier, while I was stretched out next to Blake. Everything felt completely normal and comfortable, which is exactly what made me feel bold enough to say what I said next. The whole atmosphere was so relaxed and easy that it seemed like the perfect moment for what I thought would be a harmless joke. I knew him well enough to predict exactly how that scenario would play out. He would sulk for days afterward, getting all quiet and moody around me. He'd make passive-aggressive comments for at least a week, dropping little hints about how hurt he was without directly addressing the issue. But when I called him out on something that genuinely bothered me, suddenly I was the one being dramatic and overreacting. The double standard was infuriating. I made a conscious decision not to tell anyone else about what had happened. I didn't mention it to my other friends, and I didn't even tell my sister, who I usually confide in about relationship problems. I didn't want to hear myself say the whole story out loud because I knew what the obvious question would be. Well, why did you ask if you didn't actually mean it? And the honest answer to that question was complicated in ways I wasn't ready to face. Because the truth is, I didn't mean it, but I also did mean it in a strange way. That's the most honest explanation I can give, even though it sounds contradictory. Part of me had wanted to see how far he would be willing to go with the idea. Not because I actually wanted a threesome to happen, but because I wanted to know that I mattered more to him than that. I wanted to see that if it came down to choosing between me and the possibility of something physical with another woman, he would at least hesitate for a second. At the very least, I expected him to pause and think about what that would mean for our relationship. But he hadn't done any of that. There had been no moment of consideration, no weighing of options, no concern for how I might feel about his response. And now the whole interaction was stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't remove, no matter how hard I tried to forget about it. I found myself constantly checking my phone, waiting and hoping that he would realize he had really screwed up and reach out to make things right. But as the days passed, he hadn't said anything at all. Not even a simple "hey" text to break the silence. And I was determined not to be the one to text him first. I told myself I absolutely wasn't going to do that, even though I had been the one who brought up the whole threesome topic in the first place. In my mind, he was the one who had crossed the line with his casual response. At least that's what I kept telling myself to justify my stubbornness. Blake's perspective, "Hey there, Blake here." I knew the second Luna stormed out of my apartment that this was going to turn into something much bigger than it needed to be. At first, I just sat there feeling completely confused about what had just happened. Mia looked at me with this bewildered expression like, what just happened? And I honestly didn't even know what to say to her in response. The thing is, I genuinely thought Luna was totally joking around when she brought up the threesome idea. I mean, come on, a threesome? She had said it so casually and offhandedly, like it was just some random bit of conversation. So I naturally assumed we were all just messing around and having fun like we always do. So I played along with it in the same spirit, giving what I thought was an equally casual response. I didn't even think about my answer that hard before I said it. I just said sure automatically. The same way you'd say sure when someone asks if you want another slice of pizza or if you're interested in watching a particular movie. It was a dumb, completely automatic response that came from thinking we were all just joking around together. I genuinely didn't mean it seriously, not in a "let's actually make this happen" way. I thought we were all just messing around and being silly, having the kind of lighthearted fun that had always characterized our friendship. But the second Luna's entire facial expression and body language changed, I realized she wasn't playing anymore, and that somehow I had completely misread the situation. The truth is, this whole thing had started as what I believed was a completely stupid and innocent prank. Mia and I had actually talked about it before, though not seriously. We were just messing around and being silly. I had jokingly told her that we should fake suggest a threesome to Blake just to see what his reaction would be. We had laughed about it like crazy, imagining all the ways he might respond. Her whole body got stiff and tense, and she snapped at me that it was just a joke. Like I was supposed to have read her mind and somehow guessed that ahead of time. Then she got up abruptly and walked out without even looking back at either of us, leaving Mia and me sitting there in confused silence. I figured she would cool off eventually, maybe that night, or perhaps the next day. I thought maybe I'd get a text from her once she had time to think about it, and maybe we'd even be able to laugh about the whole misunderstanding later. But she didn't text me anything at all, and I didn't reach out to her either because I honestly didn't see the point. The truth is, I've been through this exact pattern with Luna before. These little setups and tests where she does something just to see how I'll react. And if I don't hit the exact note she's looking for, I somehow get punished for it. That's the part of our relationship dynamic that's really starting to wear on me. And it's not just this one specific incident. It's the whole ongoing pattern I have with Luna that's becoming exhausting. The jokes that aren't really jokes, the just playing around comments that suddenly turn deadly serious without any warning. Being in a relationship with her often feels like walking through a room that's full of tripwires, where any one of them might set off an alarm, and she acts like it should be obvious to me which ones are safe to step on, and which ones aren't. I mean, seriously. If your girlfriend asks you about having a threesome with her best friend, how the hell am I supposed to know the correct way to answer that question? If I say no too quickly, then I'm boring, uptight, or insecure. If I say yes, then suddenly I'm a bad guy who's obviously been thinking inappropriate thoughts about her friend. It feels like a no-win situation designed to trap me no matter what response I give. And perhaps the worst part of this entire situation is that she had set it up with Mia beforehand. They had planned it together, like some kind of coordinated social experiment. What does that even mean exactly? That they thought it would be funny to mess with me like I'm some kind of lab rat? That they wanted to see how I'd react to being put in an impossible position? Like they were conducting some kind of test on me for their own entertainment? As I sat there thinking about it over the following days, I started remembering all the other times Luna has pulled this exact same kind of manipulative behavior. She's constantly asking me hypothetical questions like, "What would you do if I cheated on you?" Or saying things like, "Would you still love me if I gained 50 pounds overnight?" Or, "Do you think she's prettier than me?" When we encounter other women, half of these questions sound like obvious traps, like she's actively trying to catch me saying something wrong or inappropriate. And anytime I answer incorrectly, or even just not perfectly according to whatever standard she has in her head, it turns into this whole dramatic production. Then I'm the one left scrambling around afterward, trying to explain what I actually meant or how she misinterpreted my response, desperately attempting to smooth things over. It's not like I'm completely oblivious to what's happening. I can see these patterns developing as they unfold. I recognize when she's setting up one of these testing scenarios. I just don't always have the mental energy to navigate around them carefully, and frankly, I shouldn't have to. But this time feels different somehow. I'm not even particularly angry at her anymore. I'm just really genuinely tired. I'm tired of being tested all the time. Tired of never knowing which version of Luna I'm going to encounter on any given day. Some days it's the chill, fun Luna who's affectionate and playful, and I feel like we're genuinely best friends who happen to be dating. But then, other days, it's this suspicious, hyper-vigilant version of her who's watching and analyzing everything I say, like she's preparing a court transcript for future reference. I was convinced he would totally panic or get all awkward and weird about it. Maybe he'd make some confused, flustered face. Or perhaps he'd blush like an idiot and stumble over his words. I genuinely thought it would be hilarious. Something we'd all laugh about later and probably bring up as a funny memory for weeks to come. I know exactly what's eating at Luna right now. She thinks I'm secretly attracted to Mia and that my casual response revealed some hidden desire I've been harboring. But the reality is that I'm genuinely not interested in Mia in that way at all. Sure, Mia is cool and she's a good friend to Luna, but I've honestly never looked at her romantically or sexually. She's just Luna's friend who happens to hang out with us regularly, nothing more than that. The irony of this whole situation is that Luna was the one who brought up the threesome idea in the first place, not me. And yet somehow, I'm still the one being judged and analyzed for everything that happened afterward. She pulled the pin on this particular grenade, and now she's acting angry and hurt that it exploded in all of our faces. Meanwhile, I'm just the guy who got caught in the blast zone, trying to figure out what the hell just happened and why I'm being held responsible for it. I haven't texted her back since the incident, and it's not because I'm trying to be petty or punish her. I simply don't want to chase after this situation or apologize for something that didn't even originate from me. I don't think I should have to say sorry for giving what I thought was a playful response to what I believed was a playful question. She created this entire scenario, set the rules of engagement, and then got upset when I didn't respond according to some secret script she had in her head. The more I think about it, the more I find myself asking this fundamental question. Why does Luna feel the need to create these little chaos tests in our relationship? What's the actual point of setting up these elaborate scenarios designed to provoke specific reactions? Is she bored with our normal dynamic? Is she feeling insecure about something and trying to get reassurance in a roundabout way? Or is she just trying to prove some kind of point about my character or our relationship? Because whatever her motivation is, I'm completely over it. I'm done being the subject of these psychological experiments. I'm tired of having to constantly analyze her mood and try to predict which version of her I'm going to encounter. I'm exhausted by the feeling that I'm always one wrong word away from stepping on a landmine that will blow up into a multi-day conflict. This whole pattern has made me realize something important about our relationship dynamic that I'd been trying to ignore. Luna doesn't actually want honest, spontaneous responses from me. What she wants is control over how I react to things. She wants to be able to steer our interactions in whatever direction feels emotionally satisfying to her in that moment, regardless of whether it's fair to me or healthy for our relationship as a whole. Back to Luna's perspective. For days, that's how long Blake stayed completely silent. I didn't hear from him at all during that entire time. No texts whatsoever, no story views on my social media posts, not even one of those passive-aggressive song shares he usually posts when he's annoyed with me. It was just completely blank radio silence, like I had ceased to exist in his world entirely. As each hour passed by, I kept thinking that maybe he was just cooling off and processing everything that had happened. Maybe he was trying to figure out the right way to approach me, or perhaps he was waiting for the perfect moment to reach out and smooth things over like he usually did after our fights. I was expecting the familiar pattern where he'd eventually come back with some kind of peace offering. But then, completely out of nowhere, he actually showed up at my apartment. There was no warning text beforehand, no "can I come over?" message. He just knocked on my door like he was absolutely done, waiting around for the situation to resolve itself naturally. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I could immediately tell from his expression and body language that something fundamental had shifted. So without really thinking it through, I just casually threw it out there. I tried to keep my tone light and offhand, pretending to scroll through my phone as if I was barely paying attention to what I was saying. "What if we had a threesome?" I asked, acting like it was no big deal at all, just a random thought that had popped into my head. He wasn't here to have a calm, rational discussion about what had happened. He wasn't planning to apologize for his part in the misunderstanding or try to find a compromise that would make us both feel better. This wasn't the usual Blake, who showed up ready to smooth things over and get back to our normal dynamic. Instead, he looked completely set and determined, like he'd spent those silent days building up to this exact moment. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries or easing into the conversation. He wasn't even pretending to be calm or collected anymore. From the second I let him in, it was clear that he was here to unload everything he'd been thinking about, and he'd already decided exactly what he needed to say to me. He started by saying that he knew I had been joking around with the threesome comment, and that he had only said yes because he thought I was trying to bait him into some kind of reaction. He figured I wanted to see what he would say in response to that kind of suggestion, so he had just gone along with it casually, thinking that was what the situation called for. I tried to explain that it didn't feel like a joke to me, that the problem was how he didn't even pause for a second before agreeing. He had responded immediately, like he'd been waiting for exactly that opportunity, like he already had his eye on Mia, and this was just giving him permission to admit it. Like the idea wasn't surprising to him at all, because it made perfect sense and fit with thoughts he'd already been having. And that's when he completely snapped. His voice got really hard and clipped, not loud at first, but sharp and cutting in a way I'd rarely heard from him before. He started accusing me of always doing exactly this kind of thing, always playing around and saying wild, provocative stuff just to push his buttons and see what kind of reaction I could get out of him. Then, according to him, I act shocked and hurt when his response doesn't go exactly the way I want it to go. He said I treat everything like some kind of test or challenge, and then I punish him when he fails to meet whatever standards I've set up in my head. Blake didn't slow down or take a breath between his accusations. His voice got progressively louder and angrier as he continued, and I could see his face completely change as he spoke. He looked at me like he couldn't even believe I was still standing there acting confused and innocent, like I genuinely didn't understand what he was talking about. He said he was tired of all of it, tired of being the one who's constantly trying to figure out what the correct reaction was supposed to be in any given situation. He was tired of me setting up these elaborate scenarios and then calling them harmless fun when they blew up in our faces. He was exhausted by always having to walk on eggshells around me, never knowing which comment or response might trigger the next crisis. The word that really stuck with me, that he kept repeating over and over, was control. He said that I don't actually want honesty from him. What I want is control over everything. Control over how we feel, how we fight with each other, how we make up afterward, and how our entire relationship functions on a day-to-day basis. He accused me of twisting everything around so that I could stay in charge of our emotional dynamic. According to him, I could say whatever I wanted to him, no matter how provocative or testing it was. But if he mirrored that energy back to me, I would immediately call him cruel or distant or perverted or whatever label fit my emotional needs that particular day. What happened next completely blindsided me. Blake barely even hesitated for a second. He didn't look confused or shocked like I'd expected. He didn't stammer or blush or ask if I was serious. Instead, he just sort of shrugged his shoulders casually and said sure, like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if I'd just asked him if he wanted another drink or something equally mundane. I tried to hold my ground and push back against his accusations. I attempted to tell him that this situation wasn't the same as those other times, that this was specifically about Mia and his immediate willingness to agree to something involving her. I insisted that he didn't hesitate because he wanted it, and that's exactly what it felt like to me. Like he'd already thought about the possibility before and just hadn't had the opportunity to say yes until I handed it to him on a silver platter. But Blake wasn't hearing any of my explanations or justifications. He said I don't get to play innocent when I'm the one who set up the entire trap in the first place. If I didn't want to hear his honest answer, then I shouldn't have asked the question at all. It was that simple to him. Then he said something that hit me like a punch to the stomach, that I don't actually want a real relationship with him. According to Blake, what I want is someone I can manage and control, someone who doesn't throw me off balance or challenge my need to be in charge, someone who lets me stay in control even when I claim that I want honesty and authenticity from them. When he said those words, it wasn't delivered in a cold, detached way. It was absolutely furious. He wasn't quite screaming, but he was really close to it. And I could see that he wasn't keeping himself together anymore. He was finally letting out every single part of his frustration and resentment that had apparently been building up for who knows how long. I just stood there completely frozen, still trying to decide whether I should push back against his accusations or just let him burn through all of his anger without interrupting. Part of me wanted to defend myself, but another part of me was genuinely shocked by the intensity of his response and the depth of his apparent resentment toward me. He looked at me one last time with an expression I'd never seen from him before and said that I couldn't handle not being in charge of our relationship dynamic. According to him, I start fires everywhere and then act wounded and victimized when those fires end up burning me too. I create chaos and drama, and then I'm somehow surprised when there are negative consequences for my actions. And then, just like that, he walked out. He didn't wait to see if I had anything left to say in my defense. He didn't ask if this confrontation meant we were officially done with each other. He didn't even slam the door behind him for dramatic effect, but it still felt incredibly loud and final when it closed. It was the kind of exit that doesn't get undone, the kind of departure that feels permanent, even if no one explicitly says the words, "We're breaking up." I didn't follow him outside or chase after him. I couldn't move at all, actually. My brain was still trying to process and make sense of how fast everything had turned around. I had thought I was the one with the upper hand in this situation. I thought I was the injured party who was waiting him out, making him come to me to fix what he had broken. But instead, he had come in with everything already decided, with years of apparently suppressed frustration ready to explode. I stood there in my apartment for a really long time afterward, my arms crossed defensively like I was still pretending to be totally fine and unaffected by what had just happened. But I wasn't fine at all. I had expected him to fold completely when he showed up, to come in soft and apologetic, ready to say that we had both gotten caught up in a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. I never expected to get hit with all of that accumulated anger and resentment. I didn't expect to hear his voice filled with real heat, or to discover that he apparently had years' worth of complaints about our relationship dynamic that he'd been keeping to himself. I certainly didn't expect him to turn the tables so completely and make me the villain in this story. Something in my chest flipped completely the moment those words left his mouth. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to actually care about his response. The whole thing was meant to be totally harmless, just a silly prank between friends. But the second he said sure so easily and casually, I felt my chest get tight and hot with an emotion I wasn't prepared for. Blake's perspective. I walked out of Luna's apartment because there was absolutely no point in staying there any longer. I honestly didn't even know I was going to say all of that until the words were actually coming out of my mouth. I had showed up thinking that maybe I'd just calmly explain my side of what happened and leave it at that, keeping things relatively civil and controlled. But the second Luna started looking at me like I was the one who owed her some kind of apology or explanation, something inside me just completely snapped. She had this expectation written all over her face that I would be soft and apologetic, that I would fold like I always do when we have these kinds of conflicts. But this time, I was already way past that point emotionally. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was genuinely angry. And it wasn't just about the threesome comment or her reaction to my response. I was angry about all of it. The constant buildup of tension, the ongoing pattern of manipulation and testing, all the psychological games she consistently plays in our relationship. I don't usually raise my voice or get into dramatic confrontations. I really don't like all the emotional chaos and drama that comes with that kind of fighting. But that day, I didn't hold back at all. I let her hear every single part of my frustration. How she throws provocative comments and situations at me constantly, just to see how I'll react, and then turns around and plays the victim when my response doesn't land exactly how she wanted it to. I told her about how she acts like she's got a microscope trained on me at all times, just waiting to catch me saying or doing something wrong. Then she twists whatever I say into a relationship problem that I never knew existed in the first place. And it's not just about that one specific comment about Mia. It's about Luna's pattern of constantly shifting the framework of our interactions so that I'm always off balance. I never know which version of Luna I'm going to encounter on any given day. Sometimes it's the chill, fun version who's laughing and teasing, acting like we're best friends who happen to be dating. But then other days, it's this cold, calculating version who's stone cold serious, practically daring me to say the wrong thing so she can snap at me about it and turn it into a major issue. I used to think she was just being emotional, or maybe she was bored and testing our relationship to feel more secure about where we stood with each other. But now I realize it's not that simple at all. Luna needs to have control over everything in our relationship dynamic. She needs to be the one holding the steering wheel at all times, determining the direction of our conversations and conflicts. If Luna's not in control of the situation, she immediately turns it into a complete crisis. And I'm absolutely done letting her pin that responsibility on me. I'm finished being the one who has to constantly adjust my behavior and responses to accommodate her need to feel like she's managing our relationship. I didn't even feel bad when I walked out of her apartment that day. That was completely different from how I usually feel after our fights. Normally, I get about halfway down the block and start wondering if I was too harsh with her, or if I should have handled the situation better somehow. I usually end up second-guessing myself and feeling guilty about whatever I said in anger. It wasn't panic exactly, but more like this burning heat that spread through my ribcage. Something behind my ribs just clenched up in a way I'd never experienced before. And I honestly don't know how to properly explain the feeling even now. One second, I was just playing around, having what I thought was innocent fun, and the next second, I had this overwhelming urge to slap those chips right out of Mia's lap. But this time, I felt completely clear and resolved about everything. And the more I sat with that feeling over the following days, the more I started seeing the entire pattern of our relationship with perfect clarity. This wasn't something new that had suddenly developed. Luna has always poked at me like this. It's not just little harmless jokes either. She consistently says and does things that make me second-guess myself and my reactions. The particularly frustrating part is that if I push back against her testing at all, suddenly I'm the one who's overreacting or not getting the joke. She always has an escape route ready, some way to rewrite the narrative so that she comes out looking reasonable and I'm the one being overly sensitive or dramatic. When I laid all of this out for her during our confrontation, she didn't actually deny any of it. Not really. She tried to say that I was blowing everything out of proportion like I always do, but I could see in her facial expression that she knew exactly what I meant. She didn't have anything genuine to throw back at me, just the usual defensive responses and deflection tactics. I used to think that Luna's intensity was how we balanced each other out as a couple. I thought that I was naturally easygoing and she was more emotionally intense, and that somehow those different personalities complemented each other and made our relationship work. But now I can see that it doesn't actually work at all. What our dynamic really amounts to is me constantly having to keep track of her moods and emotional state, always monitoring her tone of voice and facial expressions to predict what she might turn into a problem next. That's not a healthy relationship at all. That's just me walking on broken glass every single day, trying not to set off whatever psychological landmine she's planted in our conversations. I'm not willing to play that role anymore. That's what leaving her apartment felt like to me. Not necessarily a breakup in the traditional sense, but definitely stepping out of a role that I never asked to be cast in and never wanted to perform. I wasn't looking for closure from that confrontation, and I wasn't hoping that she would finally see my side of things and acknowledge how her behavior had been affecting me. I had already said everything I needed to say, loud and clear, without holding anything back. And if Luna still wants to frame this whole situation as me being too reactive, too sensitive, or too whatever other label fits her narrative, that's completely on her now. She's going to spin this story however she wants to, because that's exactly what she always does with our conflicts. Maybe in her version, I'm the villain who blew up on her out of nowhere over nothing. Maybe she's already telling our mutual friends and her family about how I had some kind of irrational meltdown and attacked her character unfairly. But honestly, I don't care anymore about controlling her narrative or making sure she understands my perspective. What matters to me is that I finally said what I needed to say about our relationship dynamic, and I walked out before I let her twist my words into something smaller or less significant. This time, I'm not going to circle back and try to smooth things over like I usually do. I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself, or try to find some middle ground that makes us both feel better about what happened. Back to Luna's perspective, I looked over at her sitting there on the couch, and she kind of half-laughed nervously, like she was waiting for me to break character and say, "Gotcha," or reveal that it was all just a joke. But I couldn't bring myself to laugh at all. Instead, I found myself looking directly at Blake with an expression that was probably much more serious than the situation called for. I kept telling myself over and over that I wouldn't be the one to reach out to him. That if Blake actually wanted to fix what had happened between us, he would have to be the one to make that effort. That I wasn't going to be the one crawling back after he had said all those horrible things to me. But as each day passed, it got quieter and quieter, and I could feel our relationship slipping further and further away from any possibility of repair. By the 6th day of complete silence, I couldn't sit with the uncertainty anymore. I messaged him really late at night, when my resolve was at its weakest and I was feeling most alone with my thoughts. I sent just a simple, "Can we talk?" text, hoping that maybe some of his anger had cooled off and we could have a rational conversation about everything. He didn't answer right away like he used to when we were in a good place in our relationship. When he finally did respond several hours later, his message was really short and emotionally cold. He said we could meet up to talk, but there were no emojis, no softness in his tone, no indication that he was eager to work things out. Just basic, factual information about logistics. I thought that maybe once he actually saw me in person, it would soften something in him. That seeing my face and remembering all the good times we'd shared would melt away some of that sharp edge I'd heard in his voice during our fight. But when he showed up to meet me, he was exactly like he'd been when he left my apartment. Firm, unreadable, and completely emotionally detached. I didn't go into our meeting with a prepared script or a specific plan for how to handle the conversation. But I still expected him to give me some room to explain everything properly, to let me walk back some of the things that had gone wrong and find a way to rebuild what we'd had together. I thought that maybe we could both acknowledge our mistakes and find a path forward. I started by saying that I'd been thinking about everything that had happened, and that maybe I didn't handle the whole situation as well as I could have. I admitted that perhaps I had let the threesome comment and his response get bigger in my mind than it needed to be, and that I might have overreacted to what was probably just a misunderstanding between us. Blake didn't argue with me about any of that. He didn't even look surprised by my admissions or seem pleased that I was taking some responsibility for what had gone wrong. Instead, he just nodded in this detached way and then said something that hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. "You're not here because of love," he said, looking directly at me with no warmth in his expression whatsoever. "You're here because you want to regain control and keep me as a placeholder for now." That line hit me so hard that I didn't even react right away. I just sat there completely stunned, feeling like all the air had been knocked out of my lungs. When I finally opened my mouth like I was going to push back against his accusation, nothing came out that didn't sound exactly like some kind of manipulation tactic or calculated response. Because the brutal truth was that he wasn't completely wrong about my motivations. Not entirely wrong, anyway. Part of the reason I had reached out to him wasn't purely because I missed him, or because I was genuinely sorry about what had happened. A significant part of why I had contacted him was because he hadn't come chasing after me like I was used to. Because I didn't get to control how our fight ended, or what the aftermath looked like. Because he had gotten the last word in our confrontation, and I wasn't accustomed to that kind of power dynamic at all.